भाई मार साले को।
माँ मेरी चुड़ैल की बेटी, बाप शैतान का चेला, मैं हूँ ईबू हटेला।
So Vasan sir, firstly, it's a wonderful honor to have you on Filmy Shilmi. So thank you so much for joining me and congratulations on Cinema Marte Dam Tak.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Right. So your works are often a blend of classic Hindi cinema and pop culture. But tell me, what impact has pulp cinema had on your vision as a filmmaker? And is that what motivated you to really make this documentary series?
I think cinema, obviously, while growing up, there was all sorts of films we used to watch. Because those were also the glory days of Doordarshan, which kind of curated the best cinema around the world, also regionally. So you could watch, say, Manmohan Desai in the theaters, come back home, watch, say, Adur Gopalakrishnan, or even Ray Ghatak, to the best of French films, to everything, right? So that was like a 360-degree kind of a palette that we had during those days. So I think that is what shaped up in my mind. So there is no one particular thing. It is cinema in general, if you could say. And the reason for the series is obviously the love for cinema, but also cinema belonging to everyone. Even those who are on your periphery or blurred out, I think it belongs to even them, which is why the title is also Cinema Marte Dam Tak. It is not pulpy cinema Marte Dam Tak or A or B or those. So it's cinema as a larger umbrella, with all these filmmakers in focus who probably have been blurred out or were too hush hush or too much on the periphery to notice.
Yeah, I think it's very wonderful to hear their experiences and how passionate they are about their works. And I think I was very surprised with even discovering this wonderful infrastructure that they had as a business. I think that was so wonderful to sort of see and intriguing to see. But having spoken with the filmmakers, I mean, how has their experiences helped you or perhaps inspired you to make compelling films on a low budget?
I think it's always inspirational because also we don't come from any resource. At least I don't come from any resource. Also, the filmmaker I work with, Anurag Kashyap, it was tough for him to also make his film, right? So, and also we were also in a way on the periphery of the film industry. People weren't sure as to what kind of ideas are these. Are these, will they work? Won't they work? Mostly it won't work. And you're fighting through conditioning, you're fighting through the system, and then somehow just getting a teeny weeny opportunity to kind of tell a film, and that too in a very original or a very personal voice. So all this puts you in the periphery automatically. So I also see myself as coming from and also even now just striving for some sort of mainstream acceptance. So in a way I don't see ourselves too different, uh, uh, like from anyone who is on the periphery.
And obviously, some of the content of their films as well. I mean, they obviously cater to a particular audience.
Right.
But I think when we talk about the social conversation, when it does come to the cinema, I think people often frowned upon them or look down upon them again because obviously they were not the mainstream or the classy type of cinema that people were used to. How do you feel that bringing out their voices actually, do you feel like you've managed to get their voices heard through this documentary series, and how do you think people will now perceive them?
So I think that was the main part of the documentary, is that it is not about our perspective of them. It is their story in their voice. It is not about enforcing our aesthetics on them or our prism on them, or of any moral kind too. So they had to be in the foreground and they had to be speaking in their voice, as unfiltered, and we kind of just showcase it as is without any judgment. So which is what the main focus or the main vision behind the series was as well, and everyone was on the same page on this. There was no there was no difference of opinion here really, and this is how we wanted to approach everyone. And that's how we approach them, because they haven't been contacted by the mainstream as such. So suddenly when it happens, then even they kind of doubt it as to why, what is the agenda. So there was a huge trust building exercise that happened from the team, and also persistently and consistently over a period of a year, and that's how we got all of them together. Like all the directors of the show, Disha, Zulfi, Kulish, all the producers, Pritika, Harshita, Riya, Vatsala, Bhuvna, Mobi, Niharika, all of them, Sneha, all of them working at it, consistently for over a year and a half is when things kind of fell in place.
So when making the documentary series, what did you discover the most about the once thriving industry of pulp movies in Hindi? And what are the factors? I know the documentary does highlight it quite a lot, but what do you personally think are the reasons why it perhaps declined?
I think what happened was it ceased being a director's medium or a filmmaker's medium, and it became a distributor's medium. So the distributor would kind of choose films, also ask certain or suggest titles, even sometimes re-edit the films according to their own need or their own ideas, and it became a distributor's medium. So I think that and where the decline started, because then the distributor just started dealing in proportions, right? He didn't care about the story. He just cared about the seats that he filled in his territory. So then, in that desperation, the line started being crossed, and then what was a horror film with a legit story with some erotica became erotica, and from erotica it just became pornography. So that eventually just led to the shutting down of the industry.
Yeah, and I think, when we often talk about Hindi cinema, and I think a lot of conversations have begun now about the perhaps problematic nature of the industry in terms of what we've been seeing over the years, the representation. And I think when I was watching this documentary, they would have scenes of rape and stuff like that, which obviously nowadays would be very offensive to people, because as we have identified how even though cinema mirrors society, but it can also encourage or perhaps tell a perpetual reality that people perhaps that we shouldn't really be showing through cinema. So do you feel like films like that now would perhaps struggle a lot, because obviously it is quite problematic? I mean, regardless of
Absolutely
whatever.
problematic. Absolutely problematic, and you're right. It won't fly today. It shouldn't have even been done that time, but that was the conditioning of not just their industry. Actually, that was the conditioning of the times. So even if you see bigger films with stars, they dealt with those themes, and they did exploit in a particular way. So just not pointing fingers at them, but at the entire culture at that time of filmmaking,
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
conditioning and the understanding is kind of to blame. Also, there is no absolving them of exploitation. There is, yeah, and there is no way or no perspective in which you kind of even say anything of that was okay. So that absolutely is wrong. And in episode 4 we kind of tried to address that. We don't kind of push it on the carpet, but yes, it happened, and they are guilty of it.
And when we look at Bollywood in terms of the mainstream cinema, I think escapism is key. I mean, if we look at a film like Pathan now, I mean, that's pure escapist cinema. It gives you that sense of larger than life feeling, which basically helps you to ignore the hustle and bustle in your ordinary life. So it makes sense as to why we consider that as escapism. But when it comes to the escapism in the pulp films, what is it about the content that actually constructed escapism for them? Because obviously it's perhaps something which we might not find as escapism, but for them it clearly was, right? So what do you think it was, that factor that helped them to run away from the harsh realities of their life.
I think what happens is, see, when you have a vision and then you have a little bit of money to back, I think you try to come as close to the vision that you had. But then you have vision, you uh, don't have any resources, and then you also are making all this on borrowed money and need to make your money back, and there is running interest. There is a lot of desperation that creeps in into your filmmaking. And in this desperation, then it is not just about making the food right with the correct ingredients, but you just put excess sugar or excess namak or excess masala and just somehow try to make it palatable or an instant hit or
Mm.
just hit something. So in that is what shaped the aesthetics of these kind of films, because people, because theaters, like it comes from the nicely done up and the well maintained theaters, like say a Liberty Sterling in town in Mumbai, to say a theater in a village,
Mm.
and back then, say an Amitabh Bachchan film would play in the metros first, and then they would go to the bigger towns, and then the smaller towns, and then come to the village. So by the time it came to the village, if say a Sholay released in 1975, it would have reached the village probably in 1980.
Oh,
So
wow.
within that time period, what does one do?
Mm.
There is a homegrown industry and there is an audience, and that is where all these films come in handy, because they can be procured cheap from them. It doesn't require,
Mm.
and then the theaters also, they kind of sell tickets.
Right.
So instead of buying the expensive films, all the expensive films, then you just wait and save up for an Amitabh Bachchan film, and then the other money, you can procure the cheaper films, and still you sell tickets.
Mhm.
So it was a very distribution led business, which is what I was trying to say earlier as well. It that kind of led to the films kind of earn money, and see a sort of demand, and then after a while, like, no one understood what to do with it, and then you just crossed the line and eventually burnt out.
And I think what I love about this documentary and the fact that it's on a great streamer like Prime Video, it's the fact that it brings back the essence of the cinema that we grew up watching in terms of like the 90s where we had the balcony seats, or the whole atmosphere of real cinema as well, which I think which was very popular back then. And here we are sort of on a digital platform sort of remembering that time. And I think even if we look, Vasan sir, in terms of the larger economics, films that have done well, especially last year, were either sequels or remakes. And it almost seems like the pandemic has made nostalgia a lot more of a sellable commodity. Would you agree with this? And how important is it for filmmakers to capitalize on nostalgia right now?
Yeah, I think nostalgia always has been like a great influence on storytelling in general, right? Because even when there was no pandemic, suddenly there would be like a spate of 4 years where only World War II films are made all around the world. Then there would be like, oh, okay, only on Greek mythology or on the Roman Empire, and now superheroes, which was, it's now 80 years in the making, right? The first Superman comic came in 1936. That is nostalgia too.
Mm.
So I think we kind of want to revisit earlier times, earlier perspectives, put them in a new package. So it's not just the pandemic, but I think that it's a cyclical thing in cinema, wherein the aesthetics
Mhm.
is kind of influenced from here and there. And now, before you understand, early 80s is 40 years ago. So
Yeah.
that's a sizable period of time. But then we're like, oh, 80s was just for a certain people of a certain generation. So yeah, nostalgia is relative too, in that sense. And 90s is like legit nostalgia now. So which is
Oh,
what
yeah.
we're experiencing now. But during the 90s, it probably was 60s nostalgia that was playing, or I don't know. I think it's pretty cyclical in that sense.
hmm And I don't know if this is just a coincidence, or if perhaps again the the way of storytelling that's emerging now. I think we've seen so many films which talk about the reality of cinema. I mean, literally, we just had a last film show, which was India's official entry at the Oscars, which again speaks about a boy's tryst with cinema. Recently, there was actually a series called Trial by Fire, which again talks about a very horrible incident that took place where a cinema, caught fire in 1997 in Delhi. And now, obviously, we've got Cinema Marte Dum Tak. So again, it almost seems like we're seeing cinematic pieces about cinema, which is so drenched in reality. Again, do you feel like again it's kind of perhaps the universe is pushing us to really embrace our roots and try and sort of get be familiar with the idea that films are just an alternative reality and the reality jo bhi kuch hai hame kuch karna hai. Do you think that's what it is?
That's an interesting analogy, though. I mean, to embrace our roots, because it's increasingly becoming a world wherein you are only noticed when you go local, and the more local you go, is the world
Yeah.
kind of accepts you in a bigger way. The world accepts your uniqueness and not your generic broad strokes, or not you trying to be someone else, but you trying to be you. So I think authenticity is become like a huge word. Conviction has become a huge word to come from. So yeah, so I think the stories that we embrace, even the cinema that we embrace, has become more personal, more intimate in that sense, and it's almost going back to the golden age, right, of storytelling.
Mhm.
That the more local you go, you have to tell the story of the people, by the people and for the people, and it's only then that it kind of reaches out, or at least touches a nerve, touches a heart. So probably, yeah,
Mhm.
going inwards is what will help you reach out to more and more, rather than start with the outside.
And I think the beauty about your films, like I mentioned in my opening question, actually, is the fact that your movies are a melting pot of different styles and genres. I mean, I absolutely loved Monica, Oh My Darling, because I thought it was such a, like I said, it just took me back to the 80s. I mean, Suno Jane Jai is a song which I swear I've heard Adi Burman compose a song like that before. So, it gives that sort of recall factor a lot. And the fact that you also have dark humor with perhaps a serious storyline. How do you get that balance and perhaps make it seem as flawless as you do?
That I wouldn't know, because I think cinema, in that sense, happens a lot more organically, in a way, or at least an expression that kind of reaches one. Obviously, there's a lot of thought to it, but then those are logistics. But the soul of it has to be very organic. That has to come from within. That has to come from a deep place of love. Otherwise, then you kind of understand the mixture. You understand the proportions, but it all becomes seamless when it's actually subconscious. Uh,
Mhm.
otherwise, you see the layers, which and then they stick out. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I read an interview or maybe perhaps a quote of yours in an article, and it said that it was your toughest film. Yeah. Why was that the case?
because it was also happening after the second wave. There was a certain grimness to something that we'd faced, the COVID happening, and there was an uncertainty about how to go about it. And obviously, everyone was gunning to get back to work. Uh, but the prep was also elongated. We started before, right after the first wave, and then we were also relieved that, oh, we're done with this, and then it just hit us, with so much more, in a furious way. So after that, just getting into the film, finding our footing, with an ensemble, because we recceed Pune extensively and not shot one day over there.
Mm.
So a lot of change in plans constantly, not knowing what locations are available. Bombay hadn't opened up for night shoot back then, so
Mm.
you were constantly traveling to the outskirts of Bombay every day, coming back to home. So it was a pretty uncertain kind of a schedule.
Right.
But then the good thing was the crew was together, the cast kind of understood that, and played along. So obviously did have fun making the film, but then there was also these logistical challenges that were being thrown at us, and I'm sure to everyone around, who were making films at that time. So yeah, so those things were weighing And also to so those mostly logistical, nothing to do with
Right.
yeah.
And I think two big questions into one because we have to wrap up soon. I think number one is the fact that Vasan Bala cinema is now a type of style in itself, even though you've amalgamated so many styles in your films. आप खुद एक style और genre बन चुके हो. So I think that's wonderful to see. But I think I do believe that any creative artist, whether you're an actor, writer, director, I feel like we are privy to becoming prisoners of our own image and perhaps of what we have what we're famous for. So in terms of that, do you fear that perhaps the styles could end up being repetitive in subsequent cinema? And number two, going forward, what other sort of stories would you like to explore?
Yeah, I think once you think you can monetize your authenticity, or you can monetize your the reason why people have now analyzed you in a particular way, I think if that is the goal, then obviously it's going to be a burnout very soon. But if you're chasing stories for the sake of telling the story, then maybe there is a longevity to it, maybe. But obviously, if this becomes the business plan, then let me just make a couple of retro songs and make a montage, then obviously it's not going to work.
Right. And going forward, so any other stories that have really stood out to you, or that you're
writing a couple. I hope by Holi I know. I don't know why I'm saying by Holi I'll know, but maybe in a month's time. Yeah, like hopefully by March. I just sound pragmatic when I say by Holi I'll know.
It's a little deadline you set for yourself then.
Yes. Yeah.
No, but I think it's wonderful, honestly, Vasan sir. Like, I think the sort of cinema that you've created for us all, I think it's something that we can look up to, and I think it's creating another legacy. And I think Cinema Marte Dam Tak has definitely opened us up to not just the pulp films and the industry that was thriving then, but I think the emotions that they all went through, because it only took them a second for them to break down, and I think that itself is such a huge testament to their grit and their integrity. So I'm so grateful that you presented this story. And thanks to Prime Video as well for presenting the story as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
And wishing you all the very best for your next film.
Thank you so much. I'll see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Action. Cut.
पिक्चर का हर सीन ऐसा होना चाहिए कि या तो यहाँ पे लगे या बिलो द बेल्ट लगे.
इनका अंदाज कमाल है. हॉरर, ग्लैमर, रोमांस,